The Frontier Defense Coalition had been protecting the Outer Rim territories for approximately 217 standard years, which in galactic terms meant it was old enough to have developed a proper bureaucracy, but young enough to still pretend it cared about innovation. The Coalition was a military organization born from necessity when 17 different species discovered they all wanted to kill the same enemy. They figured cooperation was cheaper than extinction. Barely. The military structure reflected this pragmatic approach to survival. Each species contributed soldiers according to their strengths, which in practice meant the strong species did the heavy lifting, while everyone else handled logistics, communications, and the occasional moral support. Nobody questioned this arrangement because questioning it would require acknowledging that some species were objectively better at not dying than others, and that kind of honesty made the diversity coordinators nervous. The Varaxians were the Coalition's heavy infantry, and they wore that designation like a badge of honor because it was literally true. Standing 9 feet tall with crystalline exoskeletons that could deflect small arms fire, possessing 4 manipulator limbs that could each bench press a small vehicle, and sporting a biological redundancy system that meant you had to kill them at least twice to make it stick. They were, by every measurable metric, the galaxy's premier soldiers. They'd been genetically engineered by their ancestors for combat, then spent the next few millennia proving it was money well spent, which made the presence of humans in Coalition military bases a source of ongoing confusion, amusement, and occasionally betting pools. Forward Operating Base Epsilon sat on the contested moon of Threshold 7, a rocky chunk of marginally valuable real estate that both the Coalition and the Kreth Dominion wanted for reasons that made sense to strategists and nobody else. The base was a collection of prefabricated structures, defense emplacements, and the kind of optimistic architecture that suggested someone believed reinforcements would arrive before the enemy did. It housed 200 Coalition soldiers, most of them Varaxian, with a smattering of other species filling specialized roles. And then there was Garrett Voss, Commander Thralvex of the Varaxian 4th Regiment, had been stationed at FOB Epsilon for 8 months, which was 7 months longer than he'd expected to survive, but 2 months shorter than his actual deployment orders. He ran the base with the kind of efficiency that came from 2 decades of military service and a genuine belief that if you followed the regulations hard enough, reality would eventually get in line. The morning briefing was held in the command center, a room that smelled like recycled air and the faint ozone tang of overworked electronics. Thrall stood at the holographic display, his 4 arms gesturing at tactical overlays, while his squad leaders, all Varaxian except for one glaring exception, watched with varying degrees of attention. Intelligence reports indicate a Kreth strike force will hit our sector within 72 hours. Thrall announced, his translator rendering his crystalline voice patterns into crisp galactic standard. Force composition suggests 2,000 hostiles, armor support, and air superiority. We are outgunned, outmanned, and according to Central Command, extremely important to the strategic situation. His second-in-command, Carvex, clicked his mandibles in what passed for Varaxian laughter. So business as usual, Commander. Precisely. Thrall's optical sensors swept across the assembled officers. We'll be reinforcing the eastern perimeter, redistributing the heavy cannons to cover the approach vectors, and ensuring all defensive positions are fully manned. His gaze stopped on the humans sitting in the back corner. Voss, you'll be on equipment monitoring. Stay in the command center. Track ammunition expenditure. Coordinate resupply requests. Garrett Voss, who had been quietly reviewing his datapad, looked up with an expression that Thrall had learned meant absolutely nothing. Human faces were a mystery wrapped in an enigma, wrapped in skin that looked like it would tear if you stared at it too hard. Understood, Commander, Voss said. Thrall heard Carvex mutter something in untranslated Varaxian that roughly meant keeping the delicate ones safe, followed by low chittering from the other officers. The human either didn't hear or didn't care, his expression remained unchanged. That's all, dismissed. Prepare your squads. As the officers filed out, Thrall caught himself watching Voss's retreating form. The human was average height for his species, which meant he barely came up to a Varaxian's chest. He wore the same combat armor as everyone else, but on him it looked like a child playing dress-up in their parents' clothes. No natural armor, no redundant organs, bones made of calcium phosphate that would shatter under stress that a Varaxian would barely notice. The medical database listed human tensile strength as laughable and their durability as optimistic at best. The coalition had started integrating human soldiers into frontline units 6 months ago as part of some initiative about exploring species potential and expanding recruitment demographics. Thrall suspected it was really about numbers. Humans bred quickly and had a disturbing tendency to volunteer for military service despite having every biological reason not to. Bodies were bodies, even fragile ones, and the war needed bodies. Still, Thrall had his orders. Keep the human alive, keep him useful, and keep him away from anything that might break him. Simple enough. The universe, as it often did, had different plans. Forward operating base. Epsilon's defensive perimeter consisted of 12 heavy plasma cannons positioned at strategic points around the facility. Each cannon was a Mark 7 defense emplacement, which in manufacturer terms meant it could turn approximately anything into superheated particles at ranges up to 3 kilometers. In practical terms, it meant the base could hold off forces significantly larger than its garrison, assuming the cannons were positioned correctly and supplied properly. Each cannon weighed 4,000 pounds in standard gravity. Threshold 7's gravity was 0.6 standard, which meant the cannons effectively weighed 2,400 pounds. Still obscenely heavy, but manageable for a Varaxian team. Thrall watched from the command center as his squads repositioned the eastern cannons, their powered armor assisting with the lift. The operation was going smoothly, which immediately made him suspicious. Smooth operations in military situations usually meant you hadn't noticed the problem yet. Commander, Carvex's voice cut through the comm. Enemy scouts detected on the horizon. They're early. Of course they were. Thrall pulled up the tactical display. Kreth scouts, moving in pairs probing the perimeter. Not an attack, not yet, just reconnaissance, finding the weak points, mapping the defenses. The main force would follow once they'd gathered enough intelligence. All squads, combat alert, prepare for contact. The base erupted into controlled chaos as soldiers moved to positions. Weapon systems powered up, and the command center filled with the overlapping chatter of squad leaders reporting readiness. Thrall monitored it all with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this too many times to count. That's when the first mortar round hit. The explosion caught the eastern defensive line, not close enough to cause casualties, but close enough to send a message. The Kreth weren't here to scout. They were here to start the party early. Contact. Multiple hostiles on eastern approach. Artillery incoming. Where's our counter-battery fire? Thrall was already issuing orders, redirecting. Squads, activating defense protocols. The Kreth were coming in hot, heavier than intelligence suggested, and with a level of aggression that indicated they really wanted this useless rock. The battle unfolded with the kind of organized chaos that characterized modern warfare. Plasma fire streaked across the gray landscape. Kreth armor advanced under covering fire. Coalition forces dug in and made them pay for every meter. Thrall coordinated from the command center, moving units like pieces on a board, trying to plug gaps before they became breaches. That's when Cannon 7 took a direct hit. The explosion was spectacular. A Kreth artillery shell found the cannon's power coupling and turned it into abstract art. The gun crew scattered, miraculously alive but definitely out of the fight. Cannon 7's position commanded the primary approach vector. Without it, the Kreth could advance their armor with impunity. Cannon 8, redirect to cover 7 sector. Thrall ordered. Negative, Commander. We're pinned down. Heavy fire from the ridge. Thrall's tactical display painted the problem in harsh red lines. Cannon 8's crew was suppressed. Cannon 7 was slag, and the Kreth were going to punch through his lines in approximately 10 minutes. Carvex, take your squad, and move Cannon 6 to 7's position. We need that field covered now. There was a pause on the comm. Commander, we're engaged here. We can't break off without an explosion, punctuated his sentence. Carvex, report. We're hit. Squad is combat ineffective. We need medical evac. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Thrall ran calculations, checked positions, looked for any unit that could reach Cannon 6 and move it to the critical position. Every squad was engaged. Every reserve was committed. They had nothing. Except, Voss, Thrall said slowly. What's your position? The human's voice came back calm, almost bored. Command center, like you ordered, Commander. Can you reach Cannon 6? Probably. I can see it from here. It's about 200 meters northeast. Thrall checked the tactical display. Voss could reach it. The route was relatively clear, protected by the eastern wall. But reaching the cannon wasn't the problem. Stay in position, Thrall ordered. I'll find another solution. He didn't have another solution. He had 10 minutes before the Kreth armor rolled through his lines, and the only thing stopping them was a cannon that nobody could move. The tactical reality was simple. They were going to lose this position. Commander, Voss's voice cut through his thoughts. The Cannon 6. It's a Mark 7, right? 4,000 pounds standard weight. Yes, but, so about 2,400 pounds in local gravity. Yes? Why does that matter? No single soldier can move that, even with powered armor assistance. It requires a 4-person team minimum. There was a pause on the comm, and Thrall could hear the distant sounds of weapons fire. Commander, with respect, I'm going to move the cannon. Negative, Voss. You can't. Human physiology can't handle that kind of load. You'll injure yourself or worse. Noted. Moving anyway. Voss. That's a direct order. Stay in position. The comm clicked off. Thrall stared at his tactical display in disbelief. The human was going to get himself killed attempting something physically impossible, and there was nothing Thrall could do about it except watch. He pulled up Voss's biomonitor. Heart rate was elevated but not critical. Respiration steady. The human was moving toward Cannon 6's position. This was insane. Garrett Voss had been in the Coalition military for 2 years, which was long enough to learn that everyone had opinions about what humans could and couldn't do, and most of those opinions were confidently wrong. The Voraxians thought humans were fragile. The Keshari thought humans were reckless. The Plexians thought humans were biologically improbable and probably shouldn't exist. None of them were entirely wrong, but they weren't entirely right either. Voss reached Cannon 6 and assessed the situation. The Mark 7 defense emplacement sat on its mounting platform, a 4,000-pound piece of military hardware that had been designed with the assumption that nobody would ever move it alone. The designers had been Voraxian. They had different assumptions about carrying capacity. Voss checked his armor's power levels full charge. Checked the route to position 200 meters, relatively clear, uphill grade of about 15 degrees. Checked his own physical condition healthy, relatively rested, and apparently about to do something catastrophically stupid. The Voraxians could lift this in a 4-person team, 4 Voraxians, each capable of bench pressing approximately 1,200 pounds. Voss, on a good day, could bench press maybe 300 pounds in standard gravity. The math was not in his favor, but the math had never stopped humans before, and it wasn't going to start now. Voss positioned himself at the cannon's base, found the manual release for the mounting clamps, and activated them. The cannon settled slightly as the clamps disengaged. He adjusted his stance, got his hands under the cannon's frame, took 3 deep breaths, and lifted. His armor's servos whined in protest. His legs protested louder. His spine sent urgent messages to his brain, suggesting this was a terrible idea, and perhaps he should reconsider his life choices. Voss ignored all of it and lifted. The cannon came up, not smoothly, not easily, but it came up. Voss got it to chest height, adjusted his grip, and started walking. Every step was a negotiation with physics. The armor helped it, distributed the weight, provided structural support, gave him just enough extra strength to make this technically possible. But mostly it was Voss, his muscles, his bones, and his stubborn refusal to acknowledge that this was impossible. Voss, your biosigns are spiking. Put that down. Thrall's voice cut through his helmet comm. Busy, Voss grunted. That's 4,000 pounds. Human musculature can't, apparently can. He'd covered 50 meters. His vision was starting to narrow at the edges, and his legs felt like they were operating on borrowed time. The cannon seemed to get heavier with each step, as if spite had mass and was accumulating. Around him, the battle continued. Plasma fire streaked overhead. Explosions shook the ground. Enemy forces advanced on the eastern line, unaware that one human was currently attempting to violate several laws of biology to stop them. 100 meters. Voss's heart rate was hitting numbers that made the medical AI start broadcasting warning tones. His armor's structural supports were at 80% capacity. His legs were having serious discussions about whether they wanted to remain attached. Voss? Medical override. Put the cannon down immediately. That was the base AI, which apparently had protocols for stopping humans from killing themselves through stubbornness. Override. Denied, Voss gasped, still immobile. 150 meters. The uphill grade was making itself known. Each step required careful foot placement, balance adjustment, and the kind of focus that came from knowing that dropping 4,000 pounds on yourself would result in outcomes that even excellent medical care couldn't fix. His comm was filled with voices now Thrall ordering him to stop, other soldiers expressing varying degrees of disbelief, someone running calculations about human structural integrity that concluded with impossible. Voss kept walking. His world had narrowed to the next step, the weight on his shoulders, the destination ahead. Thoughts occurred in fragments. Move foot, balance load, breathe, repeat. The cannon was everything. The war, the base, his own physical limitations, all of it faded into background noise. 175 meters. He could see. Position 7. Now, the designated spot where the cannon needed to be placed. It looked very far away. Everything looked far away when you were carrying 4,000 pounds. Voss? Thrall's voice came through, quieter now. Whatever you're trying to prove, you've proven it. Please. Put the cannon down. We'll find another way. Voss didn't have breath to respond. His legs were operating on nothing but momentum and poor judgment. His shoulders felt like they were being compressed into new and interesting shapes. His spine was having a crisis, but he was moving. 190 meters. The sounds of combat were closer now. He was getting near the active battle line. Plasma bolts zipped past, close enough to feel their heat through his armor. The Kreth were advancing, their armor visible on the horizon, and they had no idea what was about to arrive on their doorstep. 200 meters. Voss reached position 7, walked the cannon to its mounting platform, and with the last reserves of strength he didn't know he had, lowered it into place. The mounting clamps engaged automatically with satisfying clicks. For a moment, Voss just stood there, hands on his knees, breathing like he'd tried to fight the atmosphere itself. Everything hurt. New anatomical features hurt. Features he didn't know existed hurt. Cannon, in position. He managed to gasp into his comm. There was absolute silence on the other end. Then Thrall's voice, carrying an emotion that the translator couldn't quite render. Fire for effect. The Mark 7 defense emplacement came online with a rising whine of charging capacitors. Its targeting systems locked onto the advancing Kreth armor, calculated firing solutions with machine precision, and then proceeded to remind everyone why you didn't advance on defended positions when the defenders had functioning heavy weapons. The first shot turned a Kreth tank into incandescent vapor. The second and third shots did the same to its companions. Within 30 seconds, the Kreth advance had stalled, then broken, then retreated in the face of overwhelming firepower that had appeared exactly where it shouldn't have been possible. From the command center, Thrall watched the tactical display as the enemy forces withdrew. The position held. The base was secure. And somewhere on the eastern perimeter, a human was probably experiencing what military medics technically classified as everything. All units, enemy is withdrawing. Maintain defensive positions. Casualty reports to medical. Voss, report to medical immediately. Copy. Voss's voice came back, still breathless. Walking, slowly. Carvex appeared at Thrall's side, his optical sensors focused on the tactical display. Commander, Did that human just yes? But that's I know. How did? I have absolutely no idea. The medical bay was filled with the usual post-combat activity, wounded soldiers getting treatment, medics performing triage, and the controlled chaos of military medicine. Voss sat on a diagnostic bed while a medical AI scanned him with instruments that beeped in increasingly concerned tones. Multiple microfractures in the lumbar vertebrae, the AI announced in its pleasant synthetic voice. Severe muscle strain across all major muscle groups. Ligament stress in both knees and shoulders. Elevated cortisol levels. Cardiovascular stress markers. And the AI paused, which was unusual for a machine. Patient is somehow still conscious and mobile. This is unexpected. How bad is it? Voss asked. On a scale of 1 to 10? Approximately 17. You should be immobile. You should possibly be dead. You are neither. Human physiology continues to confuse our models. Voss would have shrugged, but his shoulders were filing restraining orders against his brain. I'll heal. Yes, but the recommended recovery time is... The door opened. Commander Thrall entered, having to duck slightly to fit through the human-sized doorway. He approached Voss's bed with the careful movements of someone who wasn't quite sure what they were looking at. Human, Thrall said. Commander, the medical AI informs me you've sustained significant injuries. It's being dramatic. I'm fine. You carried a 4,000-pound cannon 200 meters under combat conditions. 2,400 pounds in local gravity, Voss corrected. Let's be accurate. Thrall's optical sensors dimmed and brightened in what Voss had learned was the Varaxian equivalent of blinking in disbelief. That still, human physiological limits don't allow for, with respect, Commander. I think human physiological limits are more of a suggestion than a rule. There was a long silence. Thrall's forearms moved in small, uncertain gestures, as if his body language couldn't quite process what his brain was thinking. You saved the base, Thrall said finally. If that cannon hadn't been repositioned, the Kreth would have broken through. Casualties would have been significant. Just doing my job, sir. Your job was equipment monitoring. In the command center, where it was safe. Yeah, but that seemed less useful than the cannon thing. Thrall made a sound that the translator rendered as a sigh, though it probably meant something more complex in Varaxian. I called you fragile. I remember. I was incorrect. Voss managed something close to a smile, though it hurt. I appreciate that, Commander. But for what it's worth, I am fragile. Humans are. Our bones break easy, our organs are vulnerable, and we don't have built-in armor or redundant systems. By any reasonable standard, we shouldn't be in combat. Then why? Because we're stubborn, sir. Being fragile just means we have to try harder. Thrall was quiet for a moment, his optical sensors fixed on the small human who had somehow carried impossible weight through impossible circumstances. In 2 decades of military service, he'd seen courage, seen sacrifice, seen soldiers do remarkable things under fire. But this was different. This wasn't courage or sacrifice, it was just sheer bloody-minded refusal to acknowledge limitations. Your personnel file will be updated, Thrall said. I'm recommending you for commendation, and removing the species restriction tags from your duty assignments. Does that mean I get to do more stupid heavy lifting? Probably. Yes. Outstanding. After Thrall left, Voss lay back on the diagnostic bed and stared at the ceiling. His entire body felt like it had been processed through a matter compressor. The medical AI was cheerfully informing him that he'd need at least 2 weeks of recovery before returning to full duty. With regular physical therapy, pharmaceutical intervention, and stern warnings about not carrying any more impossibly heavy objects. Worth it, Voss decided. Absolutely worth it. The battle had shifted coalition awareness in subtle but important ways. Forward operating base Epsilon held. The Kreth withdrew, and across the base, Varaxian soldiers who had witnessed or heard about the human carrying the cannon were having quiet conversations that involved a lot of confused optical sensor dimming. 3 weeks later, in the Coalition military headquarters on the capital world of Nexus Prime, a report landed on the desk of General Cormath, who oversaw human integration initiatives. The report was filed by Commander Thrall of FOB Epsilon, and it was considerably longer than the standard after-action format. The relevant section read, "Previous assessments of human combat effectiveness appear to have been based on theoretical physiological limitations rather than observed performance. Under combat conditions, human soldier demonstrated capability to perform heavy equipment manipulation previously considered impossible for the species. Recommend revision of human deployment protocols and duty restrictions. Further recommend investigation into human performance under extreme stress conditions, as current models are demonstrably inadequate." General Cormath read the report 3 times, checked the attached video evidence from the base security systems, watched a human carry a 4,000-pound cannon across a battlefield, and then sent a message to the Coalition's Xenobiology Research Division. "We need to talk about humans." Again, the Xenobiology team, which had been fielding similar messages from field commanders across the Coalition for the past 6 months, added it to the growing file labeled Human Anomalies. Impossible things they keep doing anyway. The file was getting quite thick. In the Coalition military database, the entry for human soldiers underwent a quiet update. The section on physical limitations gained several new footnotes, each one more confused than the last. Someone added a warning flag that stated, "Theoretical limits exist. Field observation suggests humans consider these limits negotiable. Recommend not informing humans of their limitations, as this appears to function as encouragement." The diversity coordinators who had pushed for human military integration were declared visionaries. The tacticians who had opposed it were quietly reassigned. And across Coalition military bases, human soldiers continued their steady work of making everyone else recalibrate their assumptions about what was possible. On Forward Operating Base Epsilon, Garrett Voss returned to full duty after his recovery period. Commander Thrall assigned him to a reconnaissance squad, citing his demonstrated capability under adverse conditions. The Voraxian squad members were skeptical at first, right up until they needed someone to climb through a collapsed tunnel to retrieve critical equipment, and Voss volunteered with the same calm acceptance he'd shown before carrying the impossible weight. The squad stopped being skeptical after that. During evening downtime, when soldiers gathered in the recreation area to decompress and lie about their exploits, Voss sat with his Voraxian squad mates and listened to them debate the theoretical limits of various species. Someone mentioned humans and their fragile biology. "Fragile," Karvek said, his optical sensors fixed on Voss. "That's the word, right?" "Technically accurate," Voss agreed. And yet, how do you do it? Carrying weight that should kill you, surviving stress that should break you." Voss thought about it, then offered the most honest answer he had. "We're good at spite. As a species, you tell us we can't do something, and we take that personally. Then we do it anyway, just to prove the point. That's insane." "Yeah, probably." The Voraxians chittered in their approximation of laughter, and someone bought Voss a drink, which was the universal military gesture for "we're glad you're crazy, because it keeps us alive." Commander Thrall, watching from his office, filed one final update to Voss's personnel record. In the section marked Special Notes, he wrote, "Human soldier. Fragile by all technical standards. Recommend keeping him anyway." Turns out fragile doesn't mean useless. It just means they have to try harder. And they will. He marked the file complete, leaned back in his chair, and contemplated the strange turns that military service took. 2 decades ago, if someone had told him he'd be commanding humans and relying on them for critical operations, he would have considered it a joke. Now it was just reality, and reality had a way of making you adapt or die. The Coalition military continued its work defending the frontier. The Kreth continued their attacks. Forward Operating Base Epsilon continued holding its strategic position on a moon that nobody really wanted, but everyone was willing to fight for. And somewhere in the military database, the file on human capabilities continued to grow, each entry more bewildered than the last. As commander after commander reported the same impossible observations. Humans were fragile. Yes, but they refused to let that stop them. The Galaxy was still learning what that meant. Humans, for their part, were just getting started showing them. Commander Thrall had called him fragile. Garrett Voss had carried the beast alone, and now the rest of the coalition military could deal with the implications of what happened when you underestimated someone based on biology rather than determination. Seemed fair, really. The universe had a way of teaching lessons, and this particular lesson was still being written in the after-action reports of confused commanders across the frontier. The lesson was simple: fragile things could still be dangerous. Sometimes, especially so,